All right, here we are. Good morning. Welcome to the dojo. Again, our topic is repurposing content for multi-channel publishing. And it's an interesting topic. When we talk about reuse, there's nothing new about it being because we're doing multi-channel or we're doing XML or we're doing iPad publishing. We've always tried to reduce effort and improve our efficiency. Even when you think back to all the kinds of things we used to do and all the things we do, not just in publishing, but in every part of our life, right? We've made wood blocks. We had movable type. We had illuminated pages that just had the outside decoration. We had other things that we could use to put ink on and do the decorations or the publishing that we wanted to do, right? We created little tools, little pieces that we could then assemble, reassemble, mix and match to get something that works, right? And if you think about these things as tools, as parts, as pieces, as nuts and bolts of our thing, you think about reuse, right? This is one of the best examples of reuse. We used to think that spacecraft was only one-time use, and then we figured out how to do it. So we're constantly thinking of ways to do reuse and ways to reduce our effort and ways to get where we want to go. The first thing to remember, though, is that work is never done. Content always changes. There's errors, there's changes, there's new features, there's new companies. We're acquired by someone else, so we have to do a new look and feel. And all of those changes trigger other changes in our process, in our group, in our documents, in our metadata. It might not be, I don't think anybody figured we would be writing and configuring things for iPad 10 years ago. We knew something like that would probably come along, but we didn't know how to address our content needs to fit that model because we didn't know what it was going to be. So the thing to remember is that if you can increase your efficiency, you can absolutely reduce your work. And the key to reusing and repurposing content is all about doing this, not just for the writing staff, but for the support staff and for our customers too. We want to look for opportunities to do reuse, opportunities to repurpose what we already have at every point in the content creation and content consumption and publishing process. And it can be anywhere, whether you're taking multiple schedules from trainers and aggregating it all into one big schedule for the web that shows all the classes that are available and all the different trainers in all the different locations. And being able to do that automatically rather than having to call everyone and say, are you on the schedule this week? What's your schedule for last month or next month? And they can publish it on their site. You can aggregate it automatically and do it so that you're like the central location for training facilities, for example. And you can do this same kind of thing for all the groups across the enterprise. Everybody has content. Everybody's referencing what you have or referencing what you needed, or they're doing stuff that you're going to use everywhere. Training group uses it. Customer support uses it. They've got field alerts and they've got knowledge databases for fixes that should get worked back into your content. You've got specs on your products that marketing then pulls into white papers, right? Even legal governs your copyrights and the copyrights for any products that you're incorporating into yours. So there's places to look for opportunities where that information intersection happens. So I use this a lot. This is Lisa Fisher from IBM, and IBM did a lot of the lead work in content reuse because they came up with data, and this was their mission statement for a really long time. Right content to the right person at the right time, in the right format, and in the right media. They've since added in the right language. But if any part of this or all of it or more is part of our goal, then we need to figure out how do we configure our content, break it into pieces so that we can repurpose it and publish it where we want it. So I've got a little example here. It's a fictional example from a real product. This is the Neuros OSD is an open source media center, hardware appliance. So it's got hardware and software. It encourages customer community software development. So there's documentation plus source code that's coming from people that they don't control, right? They're outside in the community. So, you know, you've got a weird and highly complex system that the technical publications teams needs to be able to account for, right? So if you look at what they've got as customer viewable information, there's a lot of stuff here. There's a community wiki, there's Google groups, right? And those are completely outside of the control of the corporation, certainly outside the control of the technical publications people. And yet all of that stuff needs to be viewed, figured out whether it gets adopted or included into troubleshooting guides or quick start guides or plug-in guides or anything else, whether you're going to make that fit your corporate look and feel or not, whether you're just going to be able to publish things from the community that they do so that it looks like your stuff and belongs to yours. There's a bug repository, there's a corporate website, there's software download locations, there's specs, there's the corporate stuff, the wiki, the FAQ, the legal bits. They even had an IRC channel and a subversion repository that were not necessarily governed by the corporation. So when you've got something that has information not just in controllable pieces but in uncontrolled locations from external volunteers who are producing content and source code that you may or may not want to account for, it starts to get a little daunting. So this is sort of what their page looked like back at least in 2006. Their whole part of what they did was really making sure that they were involved with the community. This is a goal not just for their tech pubs and their software guys, but as a company, they wanted to make sure that they had this relationship and they could integrate and keep that stuff all together. Right? And we see this very, very much more now. If you think about iPad or iPhone, the App Store or Google Apps, these are all things that are created by external entities. They're submitted to a corporate central authority, Google or Apple. They do statistical analysis to find out whether that plugin is acceptable, not acceptable, whether it'll integrate, how do you do all of this stuff. So this is not an uncommon situation. Even today, right? And so here's you can see that they're saying, here's all the places you can get information about our product and news about it, and not everything is controllable by them. So kind of what do you do? When you have that situation, you've already got something that's fairly complicated. What if we add an imaginary document to a set that already exists like this, right? We've got a hardware product feature list. That stuff comes from engineering, comes from PLM, it comes from marketing. You've got appliance details that usually comes from engineering. It can be CAD files or other specification documents. There's API details, which comes from the engineering group, the software engineering group in the company. It'll come from implementation and build systems, so it'll come partly from the subversion repository or from like a Maven build system. Or it's got outstanding bugs that are in the corporate software as well as in the community supplied software. And you've got troubleshooting information on the support pages. You've maybe got IRC transcripts, you've got a FAQ, you've got a mailing list to deal with. When you add this new document, it's going to get added to all of these other spaces too, right? Okay. So let's talk about if we add this new document, we're also going to define what our desired output targets are at release time. We're going to build online help so that it gets back into the software build. This is true for an externally developed plugin as well as our own. We're going to put HTML on the corporate website because we want customers to come to us first. This is fundamentally our product. Community developers help with its development, but it's primarily our product. So we want to make sure that the first place they come is to our website. So even for plugins developed by the community, we might want to publish that documentation to our website so that we are the authority. We get text and HTML mail from mailing lists. We've got Visio stencils potentially that came out of this. We've got, depends on if you've got a big sort of network deployment kind of product and you want to be able to lay out how the wiring should go. There may be a diagnostic application on the device. There's PDF if you're also publishing print. There's other compiled formats, e-reader, ebook, Palm, Mobi, anything else. And then there's the wiki, both your corporate site and your customer addressed site. So this is a lot of things to have to target. And so I'm going to show you 3 slides that I use all the time because they're very demonstratable of the problem. It shows the dimensionality problem, right? Because we're talking about a whole lot of output formats coming from a whole lot of source places. And what you end up with is sort of a dimensionality problem. Here's the simple case. You've got one content master going to 4 different output documents or different products. Let's think of the 41, 40cc1, 40c3a. Those are different products, and this same piece of content appears in all of them. Well, so then if you add another dimension going to different formats, you see that content, that yellow block, gets repeated and over and over and over again. Right? And if we add language or version or reseller or OEM or anything, our content it magnifies over and over again. And right now we're only talking 3 different dimensions. Oh, what happened to my other slide? Right now we're only talking about 3 dimensions. When we add more dimensions, more different sites, more different output sites, our dimensions get bigger. It is hard to think much beyond really 2 dimensions. Most of us don't really think in 3 dimensions. We think in 2 and then add the 3rd on at the end, right? When we're talking about the sort of location, for example, you're going to a place and there's time involved. You sort of look at one level at a time. There's very few people in the world who can think in 4. Stephen Hawking comes to mind. He's one of the very few people who can actually think in 4 dimensions. And we're already talking about, 8, 9, 10, 12 when we talk about multiple output places, multiple formats, multiple locations, different audiences. It's coming from different locations, different people. It gets really hard, right? So, and that's kind of like what happens, right? What happens when the next product arrives? Now we've got the same problem again with yet another fold, right? Now we're going to push this other product in, or we get another acquisition. What do we do? How do we think about this kind of thing? Again, so here is how it gets, right? Our content becomes n-dimensional, and those dimensions are completely determined by the content and our goals. Right, we may share content within a book having different procedures, all of which have the same introductory warning. For example, you might say, put the bracelet on and ground yourself before you turn off the equipment and remove it from and begin this procedure. Right, and maybe that happens every time you have a procedure dealing with having to physically touch the component. Or you've got something that says, make sure you do something before you touch this because it's potentially dangerous, right? So you may have that same content repeated within your own book. You'll also have that content, now that it's repeated in the book, you'll have it across different books for the same product. User guide, system installation guide, configuration guide, troubleshooting guide. These are all different books for different documents. We'll call them books for the same product. Then you've got that dimension adding to other products, right? So you've got versions within a book, across a book, between books and versions, between books, versions, and product lines. Our complexity is exponential. It gets really, really tough. Multidimensional thinking is not easy, right? He's probably one of the few people who can get to 4, and the rest of us can't really get past 2. But we're tasked with dealing with multiple dimensions anyway. So how do we do that? The simple way is to have a few sort of reuse and effort reduction guidelines. And these are things just to help us deal with sort of 1 or 2 dimensions at a time, and then add the next one and move into that thinking, and then add the next one and figure out how to think there. And the first one is really to develop sort of a truly architected information base. And, this is something to think about when you're talking about content to think about the content itself and not the mechanism by which it is marked up, right? So it doesn't matter if you're using FrameMaker or XML or Flare or anything. You're thinking about content and breaking it into pieces that you can think of as the screws, nuts, and bolts of your content. And you can grab those nuts and bolts and you can get some pieces of wood and you can build the document product thing that you're trying to build, right? And so that's really what it means to do a content architecture. It's thinking about it all at a higher level, and looking at the products. You're looking at the whole thing, how any particular information chunk or module or piece fits into the overall picture. Very few documentation groups today have the luxury of what most used to have, I want to say 15 years ago or more. And that was what we called a production team. Production teams were tasked with taking all the books as they came in from the writers. You were hitting a release date, for example. And as the writers finished their books, they would hand them off to production. Production would be kind of the only one who would look at the whole thing and they would see, because they'd see every book at the same time. So they could look across them and see how styles were applied. They could look across them and see how headings were used, whether they were all done the same way, and they would fix those things that they found as they went. And, that would get communicated back to the writer, and that would work it out. But very few content groups have that sort of overview person anymore. That role is kind of coming back a little bit, right? And this is what's called the information architect. We hear this term, role, title, all over the place now. Certainly have the last bunch of years. And these are people who look at things on the whole. They look at why some things are used and why some things are not reused, why you have topics that are absolutely repeatable and some that are derivative, and why they're derivative. The 100% reuse versus this 30% uniqueness, or whatever your percentage should be. And these are the people who look at developing processes to reinforce guidelines. They want to help writers understand how to be generic when it's necessary, how not to be generic when it's not necessary, because they're looking at the library of content as a whole. Here's some other guidelines. And this is the biggest one, honestly, for me. It's don't worry about whether you're starting too big or too small, or whether you've got everything covered. Because we started this whole thing with work is never finished. Right? It doesn't matter if you account for every bit of your content today. Tomorrow, your company is going to produce a new product. It's a product you didn't know about, you didn't think about, couldn't integrate into your model today because it didn't exist. There wasn't even a gleam in the little developer's eye, right? So you're never going to be done. The best you can do is do what you have and understand how to integrate in, right? How to add that next dimension, how to fold it in, how to look at what your content library is and move it to the next stage. Some things that were generic may not be able to be generic anymore. Some things that weren't maybe can. Depends on what the development, where that's going, how that history is made, right? And usually you can do small improvements as you go to account for things that come into existence or disappear. And one of those things really is to help your staff migrate into filling new roles. You can't just say, hey, I need an information architect, go hire me an information architect. The best information architect will come from internal to your current writing staff, who already knows a good chunk of the content and can make that transition into filling the new role and to look at the rest of the content sort of at that higher level. Right? And you can change job classifications as necessary to fit what your needs are. We found that writers will naturally gravitate to different roles. Some will be interested in format and layout and will move into style sheet design. Some will be interested in architecture and want to look at the library. Some will be interested in collating content and figuring out how to share it with other groups and how to market so that writers can find stuff in order to use it in the first place. They become librarians of your content, and that's different than your architect. And so, you can refocus your staff to get there, and you can make small improvements, and you can learn how to do things going forward so you can integrate as you go. All right, so a couple of other things for guidelines. Doc plans shift and become less book focused and more kind of information topic category focused, where you have somebody who is mostly they write about BGP, for example, or traffic management. So they'll write those topics for all the books that use those kinds of topics. You got 3 products that have the traffic management API. Their content will appear in all 3 of those books. So you might have someone who's in charge of making sure the architecture for that book each one of those books gets handled, but they might not be all of them learning the content over and over again. You might split things on a conceptual level instead. Right? You're looking for things that you don't have to write and how you can gather that stuff together. And the time you're not writing duplicate information, that's what time is freed up so the staff can learn new roles. And that's very important. Here's some things that are potential. It's not always guaranteed. It really kind of depends on what your requirements are. Corporate level tool versus local tools. It can kind of go either way, and you can move from one to the other. It doesn't mean necessarily all tools have to be the same across everybody in your giant corporation. Maybe you've got engineers who write documents and they're happy writing it in Emacs because they're software guys and that's what they do, and they can write XML that way, for example. They can write Frame that way, for example. And maybe it doesn't, right? A lot of that depends on what tolerance your organization has for pushing things together that come from disparate sources. And tight versus loose integration is a great topic. It's whether or not you change the tools that you're dealing with, right? The more you change it and customize it to yourself, the harder it is to upgrade and take advantage of new features from a vendor, right? So, but that's, again, something that's a organizational tolerance kind of thing. Let's see a couple more. So use standards. Always use standards if you can and know what they are. If you decide to use a standard, make sure you're conforming. Don't just decide, oh, we're using this standard and do stuff that's different. We see it all the time where an organization defines how things should look and feel, and then every organization says, well, I want to change it a little bit this way. So if you can, keep the standards as tight to the standard as possible and make sure that you know why you're not doing it if you decide not to. And keep an eye out for developing standards and other technology, right? New channels, new targets, new technology shows up every day. And you need to be able to make sure that whatever you do, you are able to move to something new if you have to. You can always abandon what you have because you repay for it. When you're paying software maintenance, you buy it brand new again every 5 years. So it's always something you can change. All right. Do we have any questions?
So if you have a question or if you want some clarity on something, please feel free to type it into the question box.
In the meantime, while we're waiting for questions to type in, I'll have a couple of reminders. Our next open session for the TC Dojo is Where Are They Now? We interviewed a lot of customers who've been doing XML publishing 25 years, 20 years, 15 years, 10 years, and then a couple of who are 1, 2, and 3 years. And mostly they're not IBM kind of companies. Some of them are 1 and 2 writer shops. Some of them are 10 writer shops. Some of them are bigger. But who did it early? Who did it late? Did they get their realization or did they abandon and walk somewhere else? So we interviewed a lot of people, and we're going to show you what they did, how they did it, what lessons they learned next time. That'll be in September 16th, and that's the registration link at the bottom. Also, we're starting another dojo. This is for Arbortext Edition. That's because a lot of people started in the voting surveys. A lot of people voted on Arbortext Styler subject matter. So we're starting a special ArborText edition. It's going to run the final Thursday of the month. And our first one is building styler style sheets, how to start it. And we're going to do a little peek into how we do things here at Single Sourcing, because this is the way that we start our customers and how we teach them to take over what we're doing. And the next master series is next Monday. The master series is not free and open to the public, but it is more of a peer-led board of advisors. So if you want a single conversation that's facilitated, that you can talk about exactly your stuff in a trusted, secure, confidential environment, that's what the master series is all about. Last week went really well. Some customers got some free mentoring while they asked their questions last week. All right.
So we do have one question.
Yes.
Did you use a content management system to repurpose content for the PowerPoint presentation?
So I didn't use, did I specifically use a content management to assemble the presentation? My tool for reassembling these slides was not a content management system, although I had a lot of these slides in other presentations. So I could just
So
pull
you
them together.
repurpose the content, right?
Yeah, I could republish and reuse and republish it into this presentation, but I didn't need a content management system to do just the presentation. I mean, you know, this is little tiny bits of content.
Great. Is there a CMS that works well for PowerPoint-like presentations?
So let's pause a minute and step back. CMS doesn't do publishing. CMS is just content management, right? It'll take your slides, break them into pieces, and you can store them. How you build them into a map, say each one of these slides is a topic. So I would make a data map that includes the slides, and then I use my publishing system to publish them into PDF. Okay? Content management is only there as a way to store the topics and arrange them. It is not the thing that does the publishing. So the question's kind of odd, but I hope this makes sense, right? You kind of have to know what each part of your system does and where the responsibility lies. And the publishing part is not part of content management. It could have been, but it's not typically. The content management system can trigger a publishing event, but the content management system is not responsible for publishing. Does that make sense?
Yes, so the next question to that is there a publishing system that outputs to PPT?
So as far as I know, it's not pretty. PPT is Word. The best you can do is publish your slides to PDF and use the PDF to advance slides. Because you can do some animation in PDF, but you know, Microsoft is not the friendliest thing it comes to for putting things in. I've seen some work where you can publish to the PT XML. It's not pretty.
Okay. Any other questions out there? We're at half an hour, so I think that does it for now. It doesn't look like there's any more questions. Hope to see you all in our next session. If you are interested in ArborText, that session will be next Thursday. So hope to see you there. Registration is online. All right. Great.
Thanks, everybody.
The organizer has ended the session, and this call will be disconnected.